Good morning. I'm doing this in case we lose power in the tropical storm that's bearing down on us as we speak. In last year's paper, I traced Tolkien's transition from a geocentric to heliocentric cosmology by the time of his late essays in Morgoth's Ring. Here, Melkor, quote, disarrayed the sun so that at periods it was too hot and at others too cold. Whether due to the state of the sun or alterations in the orbit of the earth need not be made precise. Both are possible, unquote. The moon is created by the Valar as a watchtower against Melkor, who succeeds in driving out the Volatilian who steers the moon, leaving our satellite, quote, steerless and vagrant. Now Melkor assaults Arin, the maiden who drives the sun, causing her to go up, quote, in a flame of wrath and anguish, and her spirit was released from Ea. The sun afterwards remained a lonely fire polluted by Melkor. In an alternate version, the sun is left bereft of the light of Arda, forever stained and driverless. Left to its own devices, the sun, quote, flamed with excessive heat or grew too cool, causing grievous hurt to our world, until long toil the Valar made a new order. These late myths featuring an unruly sun are contrasted with the well-known tradition in the Silmarillion, where it is only the moon that is, quote, wayward and uncertain in speed and held not to his appointed path relative to the sun, sometimes passing close enough to cause a solar eclipse. The Quentus Silmarillion, written circa 1937, is largely the source of this myth as published in the Silmarillion, describing the sun and moon as the final fruit and flower of the two trees of Valinor, birthed with great effort after the trees had been killed by Melkor and the monstrous spider Ungoliant. The Amber Kanta, circa 1930s, adds that, quote, days are measured by the courses of the sun, while the seasons are caused by the sun driver bending, quote, her course northward or southward, not waywardly, but in due procession. Now, while the sun is certainly well organized, it is not eternal. As the 1930 Quenta explains, in the distant future, Morgoth shall come back through the door out of the timeless night, and he shall destroy the sun and moon. The combined forces of Eärendil, the Vala Tulkas, Fionwe, the son of Manwe, and Turin Turambar will ultimately defeat Melkor. The Silmarils will be recovered and used by Yavanna to rekindle the two trees. The elvish dead will be restored, and the Valar will grow young. Now, the main aspects of Tolkien's Silmarillion cosmology include the following: creation of the female sun and male moon, ordering of their motions leading to timekeeping, imperfections and complications existing, and the sun and moon will be lost before the great battle. Now, so deep-rooted are these tenets in Tolkien's cosmology that they carry through in modified ways to the post-Lord of the Rings writings. In a 1951 letter, Tolkien describes his vision of the final battle as owing, quote, more to the Norse myth of Ragnarok than anything else. Tolkien borrows much from Norse myth. For example, Yvette Kaiser clearly connects his gendering of the sun and moon with similar choices in Old Norse and Old English. Let's compare his cosmology with the first section of the Elder Edda, Voluspa, the Vala's prophecy. The seer begins with the birth of the world and the emergence of structure from chaos. The sun and moon exist but do not know what they are supposed to do until the gods known as the Aesir determine their motions, including their relation to timekeeping. The seer has visions of the first war between the Aesir and another group of gods, the Vanir, in which some of the original order of the world is lost. The seer ends with a vision of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, and the remaking of the sun and the world. The idea that the sun is not perfectly designed is made clear in the Lay of Grimnir, where it is noted that the sun chariot is affixed with a shield that protects the rocks and oceans from burning up from its full luminescence. The sun and moon are relentlessly pursued by wolves, Skoll and Hati, who occasionally swallow the heavenly orbs, causing an eclipse. In Tolkien's version, it is the moon chasing the sun that causes solar eclipse, taking out the middleman of the two wolves. The twilight of the gods will be heralded by the sun and moon, fearing their imminent deaths, being tentative in their appointed path. The sun's abandonment of her usual path will result in the deadly Fimbul winter, lasting 3 years. The wolves will finally devour their prey, and eventually all the gods and monsters are killed when the flames of the demon Surtur envelop the world. The dead god Balder will be reborn, and a new sun, the more lovely daughter of the original, will spread light over the new world, Gimli. Real-world Fimble-type winters can be caused by volcanic ash in the atmosphere screening out sunlight. Such an event in the 6th century possibly played a major role in the creation of the myth of Ragnarok. The natural cleansing of the ash from the atmosphere, and with it a return to the full strength of unpolluted sunlight, would align with the rebirth of the sun, seeming more beautiful than before. We certainly see parallels between Norse myth and the Silmarillion cosmology, but the motions of the sun and the moon have been problematic since the very beginning of the Legendarium, the Book of Lost Tales, written circa 1916 to early 1920s. Now, Valinor, the home of the Valar, was lit by the two luminous trees, Laurelin and Silpian, later called Telperium. The trees gave off a perfect amount of soothing light, waxing and waning in a predictable pattern. After the tree's death at the hand of Melkor and Ungoliant, Manwë reveals a plan to, quote, build a great vessel brimming with golden light, which he would set sail in the heavens. Laurelin is tended by Yavanna and Vanya and blooms again, but its petals are blown off, appearing as, quote, jets of fire, and folk thought there was evil in that. One humongous fruit grows from the tree, which Aule roughly severs from it to the palpable horror of the witnesses. Aule carelessly trips while carrying the fruit away with Tulkas, causing the fruit to hit the ground and break in two. The fruit is placed into a special vessel to sail the heavens, steered by the maiden Erwendi, producing a time of constant and unworldly brilliant sunlight. The sun initially wanders aimlessly, quote, beating about the heavens where it listed, since Manwë had not yet ruled its course, and Erwendi was bidden fare as seemed good to her. The extreme heat withers flowers and silences songbirds, the grotesquely bright sun sailing nearer to the earth than it does now. In a 1951 letter, Tolkien explains that the light of the sun and moon, quote, is derived from the trees only after they had been sullied by evil, and thus the sun is not a divine symbol but a second best thing, and the light of the sun, the world under the sun, became a term for the fallen world. Now Lorien visits the dead silver tree, which dimly glows under his touch, and it grows a single rose incorporated into Rana, the moonship, piloted by Illinsor. It is not as naturally buoyant as the sun, and is only seen at night for 14 days, and then spends another 14 days refueling. Its shrouds are torn by the wind and must be repeatedly replaced by the Valar, explaining the moon's phases. Note that as in the Norse myth, both the sun and the moon are initially wayward. Manwë finally directs his brethren to consider the waywardness of the sun and moon, moving them to higher paths to prevent the earth from becoming unbearable. The revised celestial motions are deemed satisfactory by the Valar, but eventually, due to certain tidings not explained by Tolkien, but perhaps reflecting Norse mythology, the Valar fear for the sun and moon. Three strange elderly brothers named Donowin, day, Ronowin, month, and Fanowin, year, appear unexpectedly in Valinor and offer to standardize the sun and moon's motions. They spin and weave in secret for 24 hours, 28 days, and 13 moon cycles respectively, creating special invisible ropes that are used to bind the sun and moon and synchronize their motions. The rising and setting of the sun are set to a standard 24-hour day, while 28 days become one cycle of the moon's phases, a lunar month. 13 lunar months are defined as 1 year, but of 28 times 13 are 364 days, 1 day too short. This is a very early and obvious description of Tolkien's deep-rooted misconception concerning the length of one lunar cycle, an error that found its way into The Hobbit. In reality, there are on average about 29.5 days in each lunar month. The three brothers bind the sun and moon and all the world and the dwellers within it to the hand of time, the motions of the heavenly bodies fixed until the great end. The tale ends with a warning that, quote, ere the great end come, Melko shall in some wise contrive a quarrel between moon and sun, and Illinsor shall seek to follow Erwendi through the gates, and when they are gone, the gates of both east and west will be destroyed, and Erwendi and Illinsor shall be lost. Now, Christopher Tolkien notes that the original conclusion of the Book of Lost Tales was to be rejected in its entirety, and perhaps replaced by a version outlined in what he called Notebook C. Here, Melkor climbs the great pine of Tavrobel, pursued by Telemektar and Ingil, the sons of the Vala Tulkas and the Elven king Inwe, respectively, who stand guard in the sky as the constellation Orion and the bright star Sirius. Melkor causes eclipses and meteors and manages to, quote, upset the sun so that Erwende fell into the sea and the ship fell near the ground, scorching regions of the earth. The clarity of the sun's radiance has not been so great since, and something of the magic has gone from it. Now, the scorching of the earth and the loss of the sun's driver is reminiscent of the tale of Phaethon and the sun chariot from Greek mythology. And it is interesting that Tolkien returns to similar imagery in the post-Lord of the Rings essays. Perhaps the reason for the staying power of this myth in Tolkien's cauldron of story is a similar assault on the sun in the Kalevala. In Runo 47-49, the sun and moon are stolen. Ukko, the sun god, creates a mischievous new skyfire that drives erratically, similarly to Phaethon, scorching parts of the earth before being coaxed into a tinderbox. Ilmarinen, the blacksmith god, manufactures his own sun and moon, but when he mounts them in tall trees, they fail to provide light. The imprisonment of the sun and moon brings to mind references to the sun being imprisoned under the earth, as previously noted. The connection of the sun and moon to the two trees is uncanny, as is the specific connection that it is a false or lesser sun and moon that are mounted in these two trees. A recurring refrain in Tolkien's Legendarium is the rekindling of the magic sun, a future event in which the two trees might be restored, and perhaps Erwende as well. The basic premise is seen in the 1930s Quenta, where, as previously described, the two trees are restored with the help of the Silmarils. The Book of Lost Tales, therefore, strongly follows the four properties identified in both the Silmarillion and Norse cosmologies, demonstrating how deeply rooted the framework is. A further connection between all of these can be seen in the new lays, posthumously published as the Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. The first poem, Upaf, Beginning, covers part of the Voluspa. He briefly mentions the creation of the sun and its initial location in the south, and parallels the war between the Aesir and the Vanir and the resulting marring of the earth. Parallels can be seen with the battles between the Valar and Melkor both before and after the creation of the two trees, including injury to the sun. The use of the term rekindled to describe the healing of the sun connects this work to Tolkien's own mythology. Tolkien adds the role of Sigurd as the one who holds the fate of the gods and the world in his hands. Christopher Tolkien connects this with the special role of Turin Turambar as the one who will ultimately slay Melkor. Now, while Upaf does not recount the details of Ragnarok found in Voluspa, some of them do appear in the Prophecy of the Sibyl, Appendix B of the Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. These include the death of the sun and the renewal of the earth. The poem ends with a rejoicing that all the ills be healed in Baldur's reign. We began in Morgoth's Ring, and we shall end there as well. In his notes to the Athrabeth Finrod Andreth, Tolkien explains that Finrod's vision of the unmarring of Arda is not merely undoing the evil wrought by Melkor, but by producing a third thing, Arda remade, where elves and men will each separately find joy and content and an interplay of friendship. Compare this with the line from the Prophecy of the Sibyl, that in Gimle the world remade, quote, there shall worthy men and true in living days delight pursue. Not only did northern mythologies clearly influence Tolkien, but Tolkien's original mythology certainly impacted his interpretation of the northern mythology. In Tolkien's Legendarium, the proper ordering of the sun's motions is not only problematic, but of central importance, and their perfection is only achievable in the end, and it's achievable only with the breaking and reordering of the world writ large. Thank you very much for your attention.